Today we're going to continue talking about ratios, only now we're going to talk about equivalent ratios using tables. So first thing, we need to understand equivalent ratios. We're going to be using tables. A table can be used to show the relationship between two quantities. Okay? You can use equivalent ratios to find missing values when we're using these tables. And just in case you need it, equivalent ratios express the same relationship between two different quantities. So example A. This table shows the relationship between the number of green beads and the number of blue beads Mindy uses when she makes bracelets. So as you can see, for every 2 green beads she uses 5 blue beads. This means for every 4 green beads she uses 10 blue beads, and continues from there. So our question is, how many blue beads does Mindy use when she uses 10 green beads? So I have the chart here still. Our first step, we need to write the first 2 ratios as fractions. This way we can see if they are equivalent. So our first ratio, we have 2 green beads and 5 blue beads, so that is a ratio of 2/5. Our second ratio, we look at our second set of boxes. For the green beads, she uses 4, the blue beads, she uses 10, so that gives a ratio of 4/10. Our next step is we need to look at a pattern to see how the first ratio can be changed to the second, so how she gets from 2/5 to 4/10. In this case, we look and we can see that they multiply 2/5 times 2 to get the 4/10. Then we want to compare our first ratio to our third ratio. In this case, how do we get from 2/5 to 6/15? We multiply top and bottom by 3. And then for the fourth ratio, 2/5 times 4 gives us our 8/20. This shows that our ratios are equivalent. Step 3. We need to extend the pattern to find the fifth ratio. So as we noticed in the previous slide, we started to get from our first to our second, we multiplied by 2. To get to first to third, we multiplied by 3. To get to the fourth, we multiplied by 4. So we want to multiply our first term by 5 to get to our fifth ratio. So 2/5 times 5 gives us 10/25. So 10 green beads, she would use 25 blue beads. Now you try. How many green beads does Mindy use if she uses 35 blue beads? Work it out, pause the video, and I will show you the answer shortly. Alright, so here you go, you can see. We need to start with our green beads on top and our blue beads on bottom when we start with our first term, so 2/5. Then we need to figure out how can we get from 2/5 to a bottom number of blue beads being 35. So as you can see, I took and figured out what times 5 gives us 35. Well, it's 7. So then I take that 7 and I multiply the top. 2 times 7 gives me 14. So you need 14 green beads to use 35 blue beads. Let's look at another example. Example B. The table shows the relationship between the number of dog collars Travis can make and the number of hours he can make the collars. We're going to use ratios to complete the table. As you can see in this one, for 3 hours, he can make 8 dog collars. Now we're going to have to fill in the rest of the number of dog collars he can make for 9 hours, 15 hours, and 24 hours. So our first step is to decide what ratio the table shows. So the table shows the ratios of hours to dog collars. So our hours are going to be on top and our dog collars are going to be on the bottom. Our next step is to write equivalent ratios for the first ratio and other ratios in the table. So basically we're going to have to think, what could our ratios be? So we're going to compare the numerators of the equivalent ratios to decide how the terms are changing. So, for example, we can see that our first term is 3/8. So we're going to take 3/8 and we're going to write our next numerator, which is 9. So here we have our 9. So we have to think, how do I get from 3 to 9? Well, I multiply by 3. If I do that to the top, I have to do the same thing to the bottom. So 8 times 3 gives me 24. So our second ratio would be 9/24. We fill that into our chart. Then we do the same thing for the next two. So I have to think, how do I get from 3 to 15? I multiply times 5. If I do it to the top, I do the same thing to the bottom. 8 times 5 gives me 40, so my next ratio is 15 to 40. And I can fill that in my chart. And then my last one, how do I get from 3 to 24? Well, I multiply by 8. So 8 times 8 would give me 64. So my last ratio is 24 64ths. And I can fill that in here. So you can see our bottom numbers are 24, 40, and 64. Here you can see I have filled in our chart. We compared the numerators of the equivalent ratios to decide that each one was being multiplied by 3, and then by 5, and then by 8. So I filled in our chart. So you try. How many dog collars can Travis make in 21 hours? Complete the work, and then in a moment I will show you how to get the answer. Okay, so as you can see, we start off with our hours and our collars with our first term, which is 3/8. So then I need to decide, how do I get from 3 hours to 21 hours? Well, in this case, I know that I need to multiply my 3 times 7 to get to my 21. So then I fill in my 7 on my bottom. 8 times 7 gives me 56. So my new ratio is 21/56. For 21 hours, he can make 56 collars.